chosen one. There is a reason this message found you at this particular moment, not because you need another promise that everything will magically change overnight, not because you need someone to tell you to ignore reality and simply wait, but because there are moments in life when something begins to shift quietly before you can see the full picture. And sometimes the first sign is so ordinary that you almost miss it. That is what I want you to understand before we go any further. When you hear the words, "You'll see it within hours," your mind may immediately ask, "See what?" And that is the question. What is it? Is it a message, a conversation, an unexpected opportunity, a piece of information, a decision, a door opening, or simply a moment when something you have been confused about suddenly becomes clear? You may not know yet, and neither do I. But what we can explore is why this particular moment may feel different from the ones that came before it, because perhaps you have experienced this before. You waited, you hoped, you prayed, you watched circumstances carefully, and nothing seemed to happen. Then you reached the point where you stopped expecting anything. You told yourself, maybe it is not going to happen. Maybe you even tried to move on, but somewhere inside you, there was still a quiet question. What if things are about to change? That question matters, because sometimes the most important transition begins before there is visible evidence. A seed does not become a tree the moment you plant it. There is a period when nothing seems to be happening. The ground looks exactly the same. The surface gives you no proof, but beneath the surface, something is taking place. Your life can have seasons like that too, a season where you look around and think nothing is moving. Yet you are becoming different. Your priorities are changing, your patience is changing, your understanding is changing. The people you tolerate may be changing. The things you once desperately wanted may no longer have the same hold over you, and that matters more than you realize. Because sometimes the first evidence of a new chapter is not an external event. It is the fact that you no longer respond to the old chapter the same way. That is where this message becomes personal. Maybe recently you have felt strangely detached from something that used to consume your thoughts. Maybe you have become less interested in proving yourself. Maybe you have stopped chasing someone else's approval. Maybe you have begun noticing opportunities you previously ignored. Or perhaps you simply feel that something is different, even though you cannot explain exactly what it is. If that describes you, don't dismiss it immediately. Take a moment and think about what has changed inside you recently. Not what you want to change, what has already changed. Because there is a difference, and that difference may be the first clue. If you have genuinely felt that you are standing between an old chapter and a new one, tell me in the comments what you feel you are leaving behind. You don't need to explain your whole story. Just one sentence. Because sometimes putting the change into words helps you recognize it more clearly. Now here is where the title becomes interesting. It does not say, "You will understand everything within hours." It says, "You'll see it." Seeing is different from understanding. You may see something before you understand its meaning. Imagine receiving a message you did not expect. At first, it may seem insignificant, but later you realize that message changed the direction of your day. Imagine meeting someone unexpectedly, a short conversation, a simple sentence, a small opportunity, nothing dramatic. Yet weeks later you realize that moment was important. That is why I don't want you spending the next few hours searching desperately for some enormous supernatural event. Instead, pay attention, be present. Notice what enters your awareness. Notice what suddenly becomes clear. Notice which conversation keeps returning to your mind. Notice which opportunity appears naturally. Notice what you feel peace about, and what you suddenly realize you no longer need. Because the sign may not arrive with noise. It may arrive quietly, and this is the part many people miss. They are waiting for something so dramatic that they overlook the ordinary doorway standing directly in front of them. Perhaps you have been asking for an answer, but the answer does not always arrive as a voice from the sky. Sometimes it arrives as clarity, sometimes it arrives as timing, sometimes it arrives through a conversation, sometimes it arrives because a path that once seemed impossible suddenly becomes available, and sometimes the answer is simply the realization that you have been trying to force open a door that was never meant to be yours. That realization can be painful, but it can also be freeing, because when one chapter ends, your job is not always to drag it into the next one. Sometimes your job is to release it. So as you continue listening, hold one question in your mind. What if the thing you are waiting to see has already begun, but you have been looking for the wrong evidence? Stay with that question, because the answer connects directly to something that happened during your waiting season. And once you see that connection, the last few months, or even the last few years, may begin to look very different. There was a period when you probably wanted the answer immediately. You wanted clarity, you wanted movement, you wanted confirmation, you wanted something to finally make sense. And when it didn't happen, you may have assumed the delay meant rejection. That is one of the hardest things about waiting. Silence can feel like an answer, but silence is not always rejection. Sometimes silence is simply a period in which you do not yet have enough information to see the complete picture. Think about how often you have judged a situation too early. Something happened and you thought it was terrible. Later, you discovered it protected you from something worse. Someone walked away and you thought you had lost something important. Later, you realized you had been holding on to something that was already finished. An opportunity disappeared. At the time, it felt like failure. Months later, a completely different opportunity appeared, and suddenly the earlier disappointment made sense. This does not mean every painful event was secretly designed for your benefit. Life is more complicated than that, but it does mean that your current understanding of a situation may not be the final understanding, and that is important for what may happen next. Because if something begins changing within the next few hours, you don't want to interpret it using the fear you developed during the waiting period. You want to interpret it with clarity. The waiting season may have taught you something. It may have taught you patience. It may have taught you discernment. It may have shown you who was genuinely there for you and who was only present when things benefited them. It may have revealed which dreams were truly yours and which ones were based on comparison. It may have forced you to become comfortable with yourself. And perhaps most importantly, it may have taught you not to panic when something does not happen immediately. That lesson is more valuable than it sounds, because when your life begins moving again, you will need that stability. A new opportunity can be exciting, but excitement can make people careless. A new relationship can feel beautiful, but emotion can make people ignore obvious warning signs. A financial opportunity can look promising, but desperation can make people rush into decisions. A new path can feel like an answer, but not every open door is automatically the right door. So being ready does not mean saying yes to everything. Being ready means being awake enough to recognize what deserves your attention. That is a very different kind of readiness. Maybe the next few hours bring something you have been waiting for. If so, don't rush. Look at it, think about it, pray about it if faith is part of your life. Ask yourself whether it aligns with the person you are becoming, because your new chapter should not require you to abandon your wisdom. And here is another important point. The thing you see may not be the final destination. It may simply be the first piece. Think about a puzzle. One piece does not show you the entire picture, but once you place it correctly, you know where to look for the next piece. That may be what happens. A small piece of information, a name, a phone call, an email, a conversation, a new idea, a sudden realization, a chance encounter, something that appears ordinary, but it gives you information you did not have before, and suddenly you know what your next step should be. That is progress. Not everything has to happen at once. Sometimes one clear step is enough. So don't measure the importance of an event by how dramatic it looks. Measure it by what it changes. A quiet conversation can change a decision. A decision can change a direction. A direction can change a season, and a season can change a life. That is why I want you to pay attention to what happens next. Not with fear, not with obsession, not with the expectation that every little coincidence must be a divine sign. Simply with awareness. There is freedom in that. You don't have to force meaning onto everything. You can observe, you can reflect, you can choose. And if something genuinely important presents itself, you can respond from wisdom instead of desperation. Maybe that is part of why the waiting felt so long. You were not simply waiting for circumstances. You were becoming someone capable of handling different circumstances. And perhaps you didn't notice the transformation because it happened gradually. One difficult day at a time, one disappointment at a time, one lesson at a time, one decision to keep going at a time. If you look back honestly, you may realize that you are not the same person who entered that waiting season. And that is the part nobody could see from the outside, but you can see it now. And something else is beginning to become visible. The external change may be approaching, but the internal change came first. That is where the next part begins. Because once the inside changes, you start noticing things you would have missed before. And one of those things may be exactly what this message is preparing you to recognize. Now we come to the part that many people misunderstand. When they hear that something is coming soon, they imagine a dramatic moment, a huge announcement, a perfect opportunity. a sudden reversal of every problem. But real change does not always announce itself that way. Sometimes it begins with something incredibly simple. You wake up and realize you are no longer afraid of the thing that used to control you. You receive information that gives you a new option. You hear a sentence from someone that answers a question you have carried for months. You discover that something you thought was closed is actually still possible. You realize that the person you were trying so hard to impress is no longer important to you. You find yourself thinking differently, and suddenly you understand. The change was not only coming toward me, I was becoming ready to recognize it. That realization can be powerful, because if you have been waiting for an external event to prove that your life is changing, you may have overlooked the evidence already happening within you. Think about the way you respond to uncertainty now. Are you calmer? Are you more selective? Do you think before reacting? Do you recognize patterns more quickly? Do you understand your own boundaries better? Do you know what you will no longer accept? Those are not small things. Those are signs of growth. And growth changes what you notice. The same opportunity can appear to two different people. One person sees danger, another sees possibility. One person sees inconvenience, another sees an opening. One person sees rejection, another sees redirection. The circumstances may be identical. The difference is perception. That is why your next step may depend less on what appears and more on whether you are able to recognize what appears. This is why the message says, get ready now. Not panic now. Not force something now. Not make reckless decisions now. Get ready. Clear your mind. Slow down enough to notice. Become honest about what you actually want. Make room for something new without becoming desperate for it. And if an opportunity appears, evaluate it carefully. If a conversation happens, listen. If an answer comes, don't immediately dismiss it because it wasn't delivered in the way you imagined. If a door opens, look at what is behind it before you run through. And if a door closes, don't automatically assume your entire future has been canceled. Sometimes a closed door simply prevents you from entering a room that no longer fits the person you have become. There is another layer here. Perhaps the real thing you will see is not something outside you at all. Perhaps you will finally see the truth about something. A truth about a relationship. A truth about your own priorities. A truth about why you kept repeating the same pattern. A truth about what you have been afraid to admit. A truth about what you actually want. Clarity can be a breakthrough too. In fact, sometimes clarity is the breakthrough that makes every later breakthrough possible. Because once you know what you are looking at, you can finally decide what to do. And maybe this is the moment you stop asking, when will everything change? And begin asking, what is the next right step? That question is more powerful because you cannot control every outcome, but you can control your response. You can prepare, you can learn, you can communicate, you can forgive. You can walk away when something is unhealthy. You can take an opportunity seriously. You can stop wasting energy on what has already ended, and you can become available for what is actually aligned with your values. That is what readiness looks like, and perhaps that is the deeper message hidden inside these words. The next few hours may not magically solve every problem. They don't have to. You only need enough clarity to see the next piece, enough courage to acknowledge it, and enough wisdom to respond appropriately. Think about the last time something important changed in your life. Did it really happen in one giant moment? Or did several small moments lead to it? Usually we remember the final moment, but the final moment was often only the visible result of many invisible decisions. That is why your next moment matters. Maybe something small happens. Don't immediately dismiss it. Ask yourself, does this give me information I didn't have before? If the answer is yes, pay attention. Maybe it points you toward something. Maybe it tells you what to avoid. Maybe it confirms a decision you have already been considering. Maybe it challenges an assumption you have carried for too long. Whatever it is, let it teach you. And if this message has made you think of one specific situation in your life, you can share it in the comments. Not every private detail, just what kind of change you are hoping to recognize. Sometimes your own words reveal what your heart has been trying to say, but there is still one final piece. Because recognizing a sign is only the beginning. The real question is, what will you do when you finally see it? That is where the meaning of this entire message comes together. So now return to the title. Chosen one. You'll see it within hours. Get ready now. Maybe when you first clicked, you expected a specific prediction. Maybe you expected someone to tell you exactly what would happen and exactly when. But there is something more valuable than a prediction. Preparation. Because nobody can honestly promise you that a particular event will happen at a particular hour. What we can do is prepare ourselves to recognize meaningful change when it appears. And that changes everything. Maybe within hours you receive a message. Maybe you hear something unexpected. Maybe a conversation happens. Maybe an opportunity appears. Maybe something that confused you suddenly becomes clear. Maybe you discover that the answer you were waiting for was actually hidden inside a decision you were afraid to make. Or maybe nothing dramatic happens externally, and yet you wake up with a clarity you did not have yesterday. That matters too, because your life does not become meaningful only when something spectacular happens. Sometimes the most important breakthrough is the moment you stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to move forward. You realize, I can take the next step. Not because everything is guaranteed, not because you know the entire future, but because you finally trust yourself enough to move with wisdom. If faith is part of your life, you may understand that as trusting God's guidance without pretending you know every detail of the plan. You can believe there is purpose while still accepting that you cannot see the entire road. That balance matters. Faith does not require you to abandon judgment. Hope does not require you to ignore reality. And readiness does not require you to become desperate. You can be hopeful and careful at the same time. You can expect good things while still evaluating decisions wisely. You can believe that your life can change without believing that every coincidence is a supernatural message. That is a healthier kind of spiritual awareness. And perhaps this is what you were really being prepared for. Not merely to receive something, but to recognize it. Not merely to enter a new chapter, but to understand why the old chapter had to end. Not merely to get an answer, but to become capable of doing something with that answer. Look back at everything you have survived, not to glorify the pain, not to pretend every difficult moment was necessary, but to recognize the strength you built while moving through uncertainty. There were days you thought you would never get past, yet you did. There were situations you thought would define you forever. They didn't. There were people you thought you could never live without, and somehow you continued. There were dreams you thought were gone forever, and perhaps some of them changed. Perhaps new dreams replaced them. Perhaps your definition of success became different. That is growth. And now you are standing at another threshold. You don't need to know exactly what is on the other side. You need to be awake enough to take the right step when the moment comes. So if something unexpected happens in the next few hours, pause before reacting. Take a breath. Look carefully. Ask what it actually means. If it is good, receive it with gratitude. If it is uncertain, give yourself time. If it is an opportunity, evaluate it. If it is a warning, don't ignore it. If it is an ending, allow yourself to accept it. If it is clarity, don't run from it simply because the truth is uncomfortable. And if nothing dramatic happens, don't assume this message meant nothing. Your preparation is still valuable, because tomorrow may bring the moment you are not expecting, and you want to meet that moment as the person you are becoming, not as the person who was trapped in yesterday. That may be the deepest meaning behind get ready now. Get your heart ready. Get your mind ready. Get your choices ready. Get your boundaries ready. Get your courage ready. Get your wisdom ready. Because when the next opportunity appears, you don't want fear making the decision for you. You don't want desperation choosing for you. You don't want the need for immediate confirmation pushing you towards something that does not belong in your life. You want clarity. You want patience. You want discernment. And you want the courage to act when the right moment becomes clear. Perhaps that is what you will see. Not merely an event, but a possibility. A possibility that was difficult to recognize before because you were still looking backward. And maybe now you are finally facing forward. So remember this. You do not have to force the future. You do not have to chase every sign. You do not have to panic because you cannot see the whole picture. Stay present, pay attention, keep your values close, and let the next piece reveal itself naturally. Because sometimes the door does not become visible until you stop staring at the wall that closed behind you. And perhaps that is where you are now, not at the end of your story. At the beginning of a different chapter. So when the next few hours unfold, notice what changes, notice what becomes clear, notice what no longer feels right, Notice what opportunity appears naturally. Notice what conversation gives you a new perspective. Notice what your own heart is finally willing to admit. And then ask yourself one simple question. What is this moment asking me to become? That question may take you further than any prediction ever could. If this message connected with something you have been experiencing, share your thought in the comments. You can simply write, "I'm ready to recognize the next chapter." Not as a promise that you know exactly what will happen, but as a reminder to yourself that you are willing to pay attention, think clearly, and move forward when the right opportunity comes. And if this message helped you see your waiting season differently, stay connected to this channel. There will be more messages about faith, timing, growth, discernment, and the moments when life begins moving in a new direction. But for now, don't spend the next few hours desperately searching for something extraordinary. Be present, be observant, be wise, and be ready. Because sometimes the first sign of change is not the world suddenly becoming different. Sometimes it is you finally being able to see what was there all along. And when you finally see it, you will understand why you needed to become ready first. The next chapter does not need to arrive with noise. Sometimes it begins quietly. Sometimes it begins with one message, one conversation, one decision, one realization, one open door, one moment of clarity. And that one moment can be enough to change what comes next. So breathe, stay grounded, keep your heart open, keep your mind clear. And when the moment comes, don't miss it because you were expecting something else. You may not be able to control what appears within the next few hours, but you can control whether you are awake enough to recognize what matters. And that is what being ready really means. Not knowing the future, being prepared to meet it.